We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph and Meseches Beitzah. This is Beitzah Daf 17a. And the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing whether you can set up an Eruv Chatzeros on Friday. Let's say Friday is Yontiv, and you want to set up the Eruv Chatzeros for Shabbos. And so the Gemara had said that Rav Tachlifa bar Rav Dime, he followed Shmuel's opinion. There was a question over there whether Shmuel was lenient in this regard or strict in this regard. And the Gemara says, well, it seems like Shmuel was lenient because Rav said that doing this is causing a kind of a corruption. So if he's being lenient, that would be causing a corruption. But if he's being strict, what's the big deal? And the Gemara now says, no, it is a big deal if he's strict, because if he's strict and doesn't allow the setting up of the Eruv and this Yontiv that falls out on Friday for Shabbos, it's actually going to cause a kilkul, because now there's no Eruv and people are going to carry without an Eruv. That's what the Gemara over here says, Hainu kilkula, meaning Hainu kilkulim haya mutter la'ariv esmol v'hu asar. If it was actually mutter to make the Eruv yesterday and he said it was prohibited, that could cause a kilkul, and therefore we have no proof in any direction. Again, it's not necessarily a proof from this story whether Shmuel was lenient or whether Shmuel was strict. The Gemara continues, Amar Rava, Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rav Huna. Rava says in the name of Rav Chisda, in the name of Rav Huna, Halacha ki Rebbe v'lesor. The halacha is like Rebbe, and it means to say that according to Rebbe we are strict, and therefore again you're not allowed to set up the Eruv Chatzeros if Yontif falls out on Friday. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, this is a Tosefta in Brachos, Yom Tov shechol lios b'Shabbos. Let's say Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos. So Beis Shammai Omer, Beis Shammai say Mispalel Shmona. When you daven the Amida, so you say 8 brachas. V'yomer shel Shabbos b'fnei atzma v'shel Yontiv b'fnei atzma. And you say a bracha for Shabbos independently, and you say a bracha for Yontiv independently. Beis Hillel Omer, Beis Hillel say Mispalel Sheva. You daven the Amida is just 7 brachas. Maschil b'shel Shabbos, and you begin the bracha talking about Shabbos, u'misayim b'shel Shabbos, and you finish the bracha talking about Shabbos. V'yomer kedushas hayom b'yamsen. In the middle, you say kedushas hayom, meaning you mention the Yontiv as well. Rebbe Omer, Rebbe says af chosim, but even when you finish the bracha, you finish as follows. You say mekadesh hashabbos Yisroel v'hazmanim. You say mekadesh hashabbos, so you mention Shabbos, and you mention the zmanim as well, which is a reference to Yontif. The Gemara continues, Tani Tano Kamei de Ravina. In Amora, who taught Braisos, he taught in front of Ravina the following: Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hashabbos v'Hazmanim. The way the bracha should end is: first you say Yisrael, then you say Shabbos, then you mention the Zmanim, then you mention the Yontiv. Amar Lei, so he said to him, Atu Shabbos Yisrael Mekadshilei. Do you think when it comes to Shabbos that Klal Yisrael is the one that gives the kedusha? For Shabbos Mekadsha v'Kaima, the kedusha of Shabbos is always there. Elo'ema, but rather the bracha should be as follows: Mekadesh HaShabbos Yisrael v'Hazmanim. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Mekadesh Shabbos, and then you say Yisrael v'Hazmanim, because Yisrael is Mekadesh the Zmanim. Amar Rav Yosef says halacha k'Rebbe. The halacha is like Rebbe, u'chedetar it's Ravina, and it's the way that Ravina explains. In other words, like we said, you have to say this finishing of the bracha Mekadesh HaShabbos Yisrael v'Hazmanim. Rashi over here says, Tani Tana Kamei de Ravina b'milsei de Rebbe, meaning going on the words of Rebbe, Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hashabbos v'Hazmanim, in terms of how you finish off the bracha. So he said that the way you finish it is Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hashabbos v'Hazmanim. And so then he asked, Atu Shabbos Yisrael Mekadshilei shekidamta kedushas Yisrael shel Shabbos. You put the kedushas Yisrael before Shabbos. Bishlam Zmanim tzarich lahakdim kedushas Yisrael l'kedushasan. I understand when it comes to Zmanim, when it comes to the Yomim Tovim, so you say in the bracha the kedushas Yisrael first. Shal yedei kedushas Yisrael niskat shuhem, because it's through the kedushas Yisrael that you're Mekadesh Yontif. Ve'ilu lo niskat shu Yisrael lo haya kovim chadashim v'korin mo'adim ebezin. Again, it's Klal Yisrael who's Mekadesh the Chodesh, who declares Rosh Chodesh, and then when they're Kovei Rosh Chodesh, that's how we know when the Mo'adim are. Ela Shabbos Mekadesh v'kaima misheishes yimei bereishis. Shabbos has kedusha all the way from sheishes yimei bereishis. Ve'ina taluya b'kviyas to Rosh Chodesh. It's not totally in determining when Rosh Chodesh is, and therefore again that's why you should formulate the bracha Mekadesh HaShabbos Yisrael v'Hazmanim. The Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught Shabbos shechol lios b'Rosh Chodesh or b'chol shel moed. Let's say you have a situation where Shabbos falls out either on Rosh Chodesh or on Chol HaMoed. So then Arvis v'Shachris u'Mincha, when it comes to Ma'ariv, when it comes to Shachris, when it comes to Mincha, Mispalel Sheva, he says 7 brachas in the Amida, V'yomer me'ein ha'ma'ora bi'avoda, and he says whatever the day is, whether Rosh Chodesh or Yontiv, he mentions that in Avoda, meaning he mentions that in Ritzei. As Rashi over here says, Me'ein ha'ma'ora Rosh Chodesh o Moed, you mention Rosh Chodesh of the holiday, B'avoda could go in Ya'ala v'yavo, b'birchas avoda. In other words, like we say Ya'ala v'yavo in the bracha of Ritzei, that's what you do in that situation. V'yim lo amar machzir noso, and if he doesn't say it, then he has to go back and repeat. Rabbi Eliezer Omer b'hoda. Rabbi Eliezer says you say it in Hodah, meaning you say it in the bracha of Modim. Rashi over here says b'hodah, kemo shomer ala nisim b'Chanukah Purim, just like when we say ala nisim and Chanukah and Purim. Uvimusafin, and what do you do by Musaf on these days? So Maschil b'shal Shabbos u'Mesayim b'shal Shabbos. You begin the bracha, you mention Shabbos. You end the bracha, you mention Shabbos. V'yomer kedushas hayom b'emtza. Then you mention the day itself, either Rosh Chodesh or the Moed. You mention in the middle of the bracha. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omrim. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, they say, Kol makom shehuzkuk l'sheva. Any situation where you're saying 7 brachas, Maschil b'shal Shabbos, u'Mesayim b'shal Shabbos, v'yomer kedushas hayom b'emtza. You begin with Shabbos, you mention Shabbos, and you say the kedushas hayom in the middle. Rashi over here explains, Kol makom shezakuk l'sheva. Anytime that you're saying 7 brachas, v'afilu arvis v'shachar s'mincha, meaning even when it comes to ma'ariv shachar s'mincha, you don't do like we said before, the me'ein ha'ma'ora and the avoda. That's not what you do. Instead, what you do is you mention it in the middle of the bracha. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Huna says, Ein halacha ka'oso hazug. The halacha is not like this pair, it's not like what we just said. It's not that you mention, and when you say 7 brachas anytime, you start with Shabbos and say Kedushas Hayom B'emtza. The Gemara continues, Amar Rav Chia Barashi, Amar Rav. Rav Chia Barashi says in the name of Rav, Meiniach Adam Eruve Techumin Mi Yom Tov L'Chaveiro Masna. A person can set up an Eruve Techumin from the first day of Yontif for the second day of Yontif and make a condition. In other words, the person says, if today is a weekday, then my Eruve Techumin I'm setting up is good, it's going to work for tomorrow. And if today is Yontif, so then tomorrow's a weekday anyway, I don't need an Eruve Techumin. And the Gemara continues similarly. Amar Rava says, Meiniach Adam Eruve Tavshilin Miyom Tov L'Chaveiro Masna. A person can set up an Eruve Tavshilin from the first day of Yontif to the second day of Yontif with a condition. In other words, again, let's say you have a situation where Yontif is Thursday, Friday. So on Thursday you say, if today's a weekday, I'm setting up an Eruve Tavshilin, I'll be able to cook tomorrow for Shabbos. And if today Thursday meaning is a Yontif, so then tomorrow's a weekday anyway, I don't even need an Eruve Tavshilin. And the Gemara explains, Man Damar Eruve Techumin, Kol Shekain Eruve Tavshilin. The one who says you can set up an Eruve Techumin, for sure you can set up an Eruve Tavshilin. Uman Damar Eruve Tavshilin. Now the one who says you can set up an Eruve Tavshilin, Avol Eruve Techumin lo. But to set up an Eruve Techumin with this kind of condition, that would be a problem. My time, what's the reason? To lemikne shvisa b'shavsalo, because to create shvisa, to say this is your residence already, that's going to be a problem. Rashi says, to lemikne shvisa b'shavsalo, lav davka shavsa naka. We're not talking about Shabbos here. Eli yontif kari Shabbos. Sometimes we call yontif Shabbos, and the idea is lo hitiru lo likno shvisa b'yontif. We don't allow a person to be kona shvisa, say this is going to be my residence, to do that on yontif. Ve'afilu misafik, even if you have a doubt whether it's yontif or not, you're not allowed to do it. V'im hitiru be'eruve tavshilin hasam misham kavod Shabbos hitiru. The fact that they allow a eruve tavshilin, that's just because for the honor of Shabbos, you want to be able to prepare for Shabbos, that's a different story. But a eruve techumin, that we're not going to allow. The Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, ein ofen mi yom tov l'chaver. You're not allowed to bake from one day of Yontif to the next day of Yontif. Be'emes amru, and in truth they said, Memali isha kol hakatei basar. A woman is allowed to fill the entire pot with meat, even though she's only going to need 1 cut right now. Memali nachtom, and a baker can fill chavish al mayim, a full barrel of water, even though he only needs a little bit of water. But to bake, you can only bake that which you actually need. And the Tosefta continues, Rav Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Rav Shimon ben Elazar says, Memali isha kol hatonor pas. No, a woman can fill the entire oven with bread, because the bread gets baked better in a situation where the oven is full. And Rashi over here says, it's all 1 tircha anyway. You're doing it doesn't matter if it's full, if it's not full, it's the same thing. The same thing is true whether you're filling a pot or whether you're talking about a baker filling up the water, it's all the same. When it comes to baking, so every single loaf you're going to need to do work with that loaf. So therefore, to do it all at once, to say I'm going to do a lot at one time, is not going to be allowed. But then Rav Shimon ben Elazar said, no, you can fill the whole oven with bread because it bakes better. They had small ovens, and they put the bread against the wall of the oven. So because it was now full and it was a small oven, so the whole thing is filled up. So the warmth doesn't spread out. The warmth is all basically going into the bread, and allows the bread to be baked better. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Halacha Rav Shimon ben Elazar, the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Elazar, again, that you can fill up the entire oven with bread. And the Gemara continues, they ask the following question. Let's say you have a situation where a person did not set up an eruv tavshilin, hu nesar v'kimcho nesar. Is it that he is prohibited and the flour is prohibited? Oh, dilmor, maybe hu nesar v'yen kimcho nesar. Maybe he's prohibited, but the flour is not prohibited. Rashi over here says, hu nesar lefos, meaning he is prohibited from baking. V'kimcho nesar, but also his flour is prohibited, meaning shalo yehu acherim ofen kimcho ba'odo shalo, that other people shouldn't take his flour while he owns it and bake with it as well. Or maybe that's not true. Maybe even though it's his flour, other people would be able to bake with it. And the Gemara says, Lamai nafkamina, what difference does it make? Lakanuye kimcho lacherim. It makes a difference in other, if you have to be makna, if you have to give over the flour to the other people. Rashi says, Lakanuye kimcho. In sarich losses b'matanes kimcho. Does he have to give his flour as a gift? Shiyu acherim mutar melafosav v'loseslo. That way, other people will be able to bake it for him and give it to him. Does he have to actually be makna to them or not? And the Gemara explains, if you say that it's usher for him to bake and his flour is usher, so tzarech laknui, he has to be makna to others. Tzarech laknui, kimchol acherim, he has to be makna his kemach to others in order to bake with that kemach. But if you're going to say that he's prohibited to bake, but the flour is not prohibited, so lo tzarech laknui kimchol acherim, he doesn't need to be makna his flour to other people. And so the Gemara says, so what actually is the halacha? Gemara says, Tashma, come here the following proof. It says, Mishalo hiniach eruv tavshilin. Let's say somebody did not set up an eruv tavshilin. So hareze lo yefe, v'lo yevashel, v'lo yatmin, lo v'lo la'acherim. So he's not allowed to bake, he's not allowed to cook, he's not allowed to be matmin. In other words, he can't insulate something in order to warm it up. He can't do it for himself, he can't do it for others. V'lo acherim ofen umevashlen lo. And other people are not allowed to bake and cook for him. So therefore, so therefore, what should he do? So makne kimchol acherim. So he has to be makne his flour to others. V'ofen lo mevashlen lo. They bake for him, they cook for him. And so the Gemara says, you see clearly, Shema mina, hu nesar v'kimcho nesar Shema mina. You see that he's prohibited from baking, but also his kemach is prohibited to use. He has to be maknet. And the Gemara continues, they ask the following question. Avar v'yafamai. Let's say the person transgressed, and he did bake. He didn't make the eruv tavshilin, but he ended up transgressing and baking. Rashi says, Avar v'yafamai ma'u sheyochel b'Shabbos. Is he allowed to eat this food on Shabbos? So the Gemara says, Tashma, come in here. Mishalohi eruv tavshilin. It says again, somebody who didn't make an eruv tavshilin. Ketzad also, what does he do? Makne kimchol acherim. He's makne his flour to others. V'acherim ofen lo mevashlen lo. And those others, they bake for him and they cook for him. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Zayin Amud Beis.